Hello, everyone. Today, I'm excited to be hosting the second Yours Truly Roundtable discussion, and we'll be using the Not Estuary protocol to facilitate our discussion today. Last fall, I found myself doing a mini podcast series featuring people from what is considered the creative world, people in film, writing, music, and art. In some ways, I did this as a form of personal discovery and dialogue, trying to better understand myself as someone many people have considered creative but have never felt like a true creative. Today, I've invited several of those people back for this roundtable, Not Estuary discussion, as a type of experiment in this online relationality and firmament. Most of the people here are either very familiar or tangentially connected to this little corner of the internet or the TLC, and have at least been very significantly impacted by many of the intellectual heavy hitters of the corner, Peterson, Peugeot, Vervaeke, Vanderklay, etc. And I wanted to ask and see how the minds of people who have spent blood, skin, and care over creative passion projects, who have integrated these intellectual ideas into their own work, what might come through the relationality here via dialogue and conversation. Might something valuable be crafted or formed through this exchange and connection over the digital ones and zeros? This is the beauty of possibility. And if you find this particular of the corner internet fascinating and want to hear more from these heavy hitters in person and meeting up with other people from around the corner like me, consider showing up to this.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Peugeot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Yeah, I'm going to be there. Are you? So also, don't forget to like and subscribe for the vanity metrics and share this with friends if you think it will connect. Leave a comment, keep the conversation going. And if you think yours truly is something worth supporting financially, consider channel membership. Members get podcast previews and personal updates from me, thinking out loud about this world and the channel's progress. Link will be down in the description. I'm excited to introduce or reintroduce to each of you the people and their work here today, but we'll leave that for the Not Estuary protocol. What I will tell you is that this conversation involves the writer, the illustrator, the virtuoso, the singer, songwriter, the producer, and me. So let's get this thing going. So clock in, sit back, and it's time we found ourselves in for another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. So without any further delay, I give you the Creatives Roundtable, Not Estuary. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Gentlemen, thanks for being here today. So yeah, we're going to get this thing going. We're going to start with introductions. This is the Creative Roundtable, and we'll just start with McMo, and we'll work our way to Matt, James, and Chris. So yeah, man, let's introductions.
Which one of those was I? And I missed which one you.
Oh, I think I picked you as producer.
Okay.
I think I picked you as producer.
Even though they're better producers, probably on the call, you picked me as producer. I get it.
I picked you as producer.
Yeah, so I'm McMo, denizen of the corner, member of many secret Discord and shadowy cabal in the underlayer of TLC. But I make music primarily as a vocation. That is not my day job. So yeah, I think maybe when we get to the pitch round, I'll probably be talking a little bit more about that. But yeah, I live in North Carolina in Asheville, originally from Savannah, Georgia. I grew up playing in a Southern Baptist worship band, drums, and learning piano. Went to college for sound design at Savannah College of Art and Design, and then got a job working at a small megachurch, you could say. First as the sound guy, and then eventually as the director of media and production. And then basically got married. About a year after I got married, the church, it's a long story, don't have to get into it, but the church fired me. And so that kind of led me into the wilderness, but really freed up the time for me to kind of use electronic music production as an outlet and as a spiritual practice, even when, and a connection to God, really, even when a lot of my propositions and kind of faith statements were a little more rocky. And then, so I've released music on Spotify. I've worked with some of my best friends in the world to put music on Spotify, and love art, love design. And then I found TLC, and I guess maybe this has gone on for too long, but yeah, that's probably good enough.
Yeah, and now you're the you help
Yeah.
produce like branding for a lot of
I make a lot of branding. That the ad for Midwestuary, that was the music by me, and then that narration by Neil, and
Nice.
Chad put that together. So a little team up by me, Chad, and Neil. It was a good time.
All right, thanks, McMo. Matt, what's up?
My name is Matt. I am a singer, songwriter, producer. I also live in North Carolina. I'm in Charlotte, originally from New York, Long Island. Just loved music my whole life, and then had an opportunity to kind of pursue it full time, kind of in an entrepreneurial way, doing like licensing music, royalty free music, and so that's what I do full time, in addition to my own artistic endeavors. So, yeah, I got my studio here, which is about 10 minutes from my house. Me and my wife and soon to be 6 kids.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
I didn't know about that one. So yeah, anything else you want to add before we move on?
No.
All right, cool. Got it. Did I say James? We're going to be next. Let's do James.
Okay. My name is James Taylor Foreman. I am from Louisiana. I grew up in a very small town, Louisiana, telling stories since I was about 8 to my nephews and cousins, and something I'm a writer and I'm a storyteller, and something I've always been drawn to, myth, and kind of unconsciously drawn to those things when I was young. And then I studied philosophy in college and got really into that world, became an atheist for the majority of my life. So 10 years of my life, something like that. And my adult life, I should say. And I had a coming back to faith. That was a slow process through understanding reality as narrative, and then understanding the stories of the Old Testament, and then kind of coming back to Christ as the center of all things. And that was something that I wrote about in an essay that kind of took off on Substack called Why I'm Christian Again. And I'm really into storytelling. I've written scripts, one about a snake oil salesman and one about Genesis. And that's basically me. I'm a writer. I'm really interested in the word.
Well, Chris is having some technical difficulty, it seems. I'm double checking. I'm going to do a little intro video that kind of outlines the protocol, the not estuary protocol, and so you can kind of keep that fresh in your brain of kind of how we'll continue forward in the conversation. So we'll see if Chris pops back in during that. The estuary protocol is simple. It was developed by Paul Vanderklay and John Van Donk as a part of their response to the meaning crisis. The protocol goes like this. First, introduce yourself. Tell about yourself, a little bit of your background and how you got here. And then it's the 3 Ps. Pitch your idea, what's been most salient to you, what's been most meaningful to you, something that you've wanted to talk about. It could be intellectual, propositional, something about estuary. There are variations on this. Round 3 is you point to the idea that you most want discussed, generally not your own. So you point to the idea from the person that you found most compelling. And then a vote is tallied, and the idea that had the most attention and salience begins the conversation, which is round 4. Play. Point, pitch, play. Now you get to play with the idea together. You get to try to synthesize, you get to try to innovate, you get to try to empathize, you get to try to understand. It's simple, yet powerful. Something maybe like elegant. And it's changing certain parts of the world. It's changed this corner of the internet. It's changed me. And I'm glad to be a part of it. Thanks. All right, guys. So we'll start with the pitch here. And so, McMo, we'll start with you. We'll work our way around, kind of see how it goes.
I guess what's on my mind is, well, it has to do with basically I've been given it basic corporate life, the college try for the last 3 or so years. Before that, I was a window washer, and part of making more money in the job I have now and just the warp and waff of life over time, I guess it's made it more difficult, I guess, to intake as much information from people like Jordan Peterson or philosophy and stuff like that. Like, I've basically had to choose between community on TLC and that kind of like online space versus my own kind of artistic pursuits in some ways not. I mean, I've still gotten it done. So there's an element of like time management, I guess, and how do you kind of balance life as a creative. And so I'd be interested in hearing you guys' thoughts on that. But then it kind of pairs with every time I'm struggling with work, I always get these like entrepreneurial or like these dreams of like, if I could just be doing exactly what I wanted to do, what would I be doing, kind of a thing. And one of the things that has cropped up in my mind is something like creative art or artistic monasteries, because I see a huge place for the church, capital C and otherwise, maybe Christian generally, for the like funding of quote unquote universities or conservatories. And I think it's the perfect time to start talking about something like that, because at least on the like cultural zeitgeist as it comes to me on the internet, it seems like conservatives are, for the first time in a long time, really taking aesthetics and story and creativity seriously, or at least more seriously than they have my whole life. But I don't see an uptick in Christian art other than like The Chosen or, Jonathan Pajot specifically. There doesn't seem to be the same type of cultural totems, shall we say, in the wake of somebody like Peterson or, ARC or whatever you want to call the kind of new right. They're still kind of forced to either they listen to country music, to just keep it to music. Either they listen to country music or, they're listening to like Beethoven and Bach or something like that. It's either that kind of like mammonistic, as sharp and clean cut of songwriting and production as possible, which is also bringing in all of these like like, don't get me started on Nashville. As soon as I start thinking about Nashville, I turn into like a prophet wanting to rain down hellfire.
Chris isn't on the line right now.
But yeah, I guess I'm to avoid rambling, those are a couple of things in my mind, is that kind of personal management of time aspect, especially starting a family. Me and my wife don't have any kids yet, but we're hoping to kind of start that in the next phase. So that kind of, Matt, you making a career out of your music is super interesting to me. I'd love to learn about that. But yeah, in general, like, how do you balance those things? And then that kind of idea of the church taking a bigger stance in the kind of music appreciation or art appreciation and art history and all of that kind of education of the arts, that in a lot of ways I think would level up the level of conversation toward, instead of it being like pillars bad or pillars good, brutalism bad, to kind of, get some nuance in those conversations, and for the ultimate goal, obviously, for believers to be like leading the way in terms of what's beautiful and what's creative, and being sub creators. Like, my whole life, and this will be the last thing I say, my whole life it's just been a big slap in the face to me that like Christians are not anywhere close in general to the best artists in the world. Now, hopefully some of that's changing, especially with the fine folks on here. But in general, there's that feeling, right, that like there's secular art that's at the tippy top, and then there's a whole history of Christian art that's kind of what this new art is judged by. But the new artists, the Christian artists alive today are nowhere to be seen, or they're kind of hemmed in by the CCM industry. So that's a lot on the table. Sorry.
Let's see. We got dreams versus reality and time management, artistic monasteries, Christian art, secular art kind of
Yeah, I took an alpha brain before this, so forgive me for my loquaciousness.
It's like it's happening. All right, Matt, we'll move to you, dude.
I have been thinking about the concept of when you're working on a project, whatever it is, any creative endeavor, how do you know when the project should be abandoned versus sat with or set aside and then relooked at? How do you all approach that kind of question? And is there like a balance between feeling bored with something or knowing that you're too distracted? Like, is there a way to perceive that this thing that you're creating something will crack if you keep poking at it, or it's not good to begin with, and you just move on to the next demo? In my case, as a producer, there's a tendency to have just hard drives and hard drives of unfinished projects because of this tendency. And so what is it that brings you back to the ones that you've abandoned and to complete those because you think that there's something there? And then is there something outside of the artistic endeavor that should be like addressed? Like maybe just your phone time causing you to want a dopaminergic cycle too quickly. And now you're addicted to that feeling of like starting a new project, but then not knowing how to have that rumination and that time spent to really flesh that out. Or is the idea just bad in general? So it's like how do those things kind of play with each other, and how to make that discernment? Yeah, that's been a question for me as I've been compiling demos for my album.
Yeah, so when to abandon or set aside, or to push through. Are you bored or distracted? Play versus structure, kind of prolificity versus bad idea. Some things there.
Yep.
Okay, cool. James, what's up?
This is the first time I'm exposed to this format. It's very cool. And so I didn't necessarily think about this, but I do have something in mind. I'm working on a very long essay right now about belief, and not necessarily belief in God, although that's part of it, but believing in what you're doing, who you are, your family, your country, or whatever the sort of phenomenon is that you're trying to align yourself with. And so the way that I've been thinking about it is how difficult it is to believe right now. And it kind of overlaps with a lot of things that we're talking about, how to believe in an artistic project, how to believe in the aesthetics of the culture that we're in. When do we, give up the idea that we're not going to have neoclassical, or that America's not going to be Art Deco, or that drop ceilings are horrific and they, eat your soul away. And the idea that I've been playing with is that before the introduction of the word, and forgive me, I'm getting out there, but before the tribe of the Hebrews discovered alphabetic language and discovered the word and had the ability to create what I might call hyper landscapes, they had the ability to sort of access consciously the kingdom of heaven and to deny the immediate landscape, of the gods that were being worshipped by the tribes around them, and to learn how to align themselves with the landscape or the kingdom that always is underneath all landscapes. It's sort of an abstracted landscape is how you could think about like the word or the kingdom of God. And I think we're tripped up in a very specific way in the modern world, because we live we sort of take for granted that we live in these hyper landscapes. Sort of Judeo-Christian values have taken over the world, and it's not just because it's one belief set among many. It's because it's an incredibly useful incredibly useful psychotechnology that allows for the modern world, and we forget that, but that's just the case. And we live in these hyper landscapes of meaning, of money, of politics, or whatever. We're having what we call a meaning crisis. To me, that the reason for that is because we now have within this landscape, within this hyper landscape, we have hyper predators and hyper porn, and we have these things that distract us from protecting our hyper body, what we would call our spirit. And so the comparison there is that we used to be worried about dying. And what made us believe was that we had to protect our physical bodies from dying. And what I'm saying now is that spiritual battle has shifted to this hyper landscape, and now it's our duty to keep our spirit alive, to keep our hyper body alive, and that we're tasked with battling against meaninglessness every day. And if we fail that, we're the walking dead. And I think that's also partially why we're so obsessed with zombies, is because most people are dead because their spirit is gone. And so I'm thinking about belief I've kind of touched on a few of the main themes there, but I'm thinking about how to get our heart, loins, and head aligned and explode the world with our berserker spirit of believing. And I believe that if we did that, the world would ripple. And I think that would be it's not just believing. It's not just this thing that makes us feel good. There would be evidence in the world if we could truly believe. And so I want to know, how can we really believe? How can we dance in the world? How can we play? How can we be free? That's it.
Self-belief, believing and its foundation on something like logos in the word, hyper landscapes, these hyper realities or non-realities or something like that we're trying to believe on top of and in this space. I have thoughts on that because I was listening to John Vervaeke had Jordan Hall and another guy on, Matthew Piet, I don't know his last name, and they were talking about AIs, personalized AIs that are trying to protect your soul, basically, from those hyper realities. Kind of interesting. All right, so I don't know if Chris is going to make it back in. They had to run through one song in their sound check, and Matt Krotz has totally ghosted us today. So
Wow.
We'll give him some hell about that later. But I guess for me, I didn't think I was gonna do one. But since we're down a few people, I'll throw this in. And I kind of hit on it in the intro, which is just, what is a creative? Is that when I've had certain conversations here in the corner, it's like, well, everybody's creative, and so why am I calling this a creatives roundtable? And why is it exclusive to people that have done certain things? So what do y'all think about that idea of, and James, you already kind of pointed to, like, can zombies be creative, I guess, or if everybody's creative, if there's nobody creative, but is it only defined by some achievements, that are measured by certain matrices? And so what is creative? I guess that's where I'm going to land for that. All right, so we're going to move on to round 3, which is to point or vote on one of these ideas. You can't vote on your own. If you do, you just end up looking like a jerk. But I guess you can. But I'll run back through those. McMo was corporate life versus community life and time management or creative life. Artistic pursuit, where's the if I could do exactly what I wanted to do versus your dreams and reality. Artistic monasteries, Christian art. Matt Hylam's was when to set aside a project, when to push through. Am I bored, distracted? How do I know if prolificity is good, or am I just spinning on bad ideas? And then James was about belief, hyper landscapes. So McMo, point.
It's very difficult with just the 4 of us, and all 3 of you guys' stuff was really good. I could talk for hours about all of it. Also, lots of Kierkegaard coming up, so I'm sure I'll get my Kierkegaard in where I can fit it in. But I think I want to point to Matt's because, well, yeah, I'll leave my because and hopefully it wins so I can give my becauses. But yeah, I'm gonna point to Matt's.
All right, Matt, what do you got?
I will point to James's. I think I think somehow that's going to tie everything together. We'll hit all the topics if we start with belief.
Yeah, probably. Okay, so we got Matt, we got James. All right, James, who are you pointing at?
I'm gonna help none of us by pointing to McMo.
Helps us because we all have to watch Christian squirm to break the tie.
Yes.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
I like the creative monasteries idea, and I really do want to talk about conservative art and is secular music or secular art better? I think that would be an interesting discussion.
Okay. Me, so yeah, this is gonna define where we kind of start out. Which one?
Just cast lots.
Cast lots before whatever. Yeah,
We need some dice from Grimm.
look, I've got my arc
Hey, look at that.
journal here using it. Let's see. Oh man, yeah, this is pressure. I need another vote. I don't know if Chris is coming back, but I guess he probably missed all of that. So, all right, let's see. Man, guys, this is so hard for me. I'm just gonna go with McMo's. We're gonna go with McMo's, and we'll kind of see where. So just start playing. Pardon me. Play with that. Maybe James, since you pointed there, go ahead and kind of play with those ideas that were sparking off for you.
I think about this a lot in terms of you said a couple of things. You said that conservatives aren't seen as the ones creating the good art, and that there is a certain shift going on, but is it really? Because it's The Chosen and Jonathan Pajou and what else? But I don't necessarily disagree, but I would be interested to challenge that, because I think the only great in the world of writers, some of the only great art I can think of in the last couple hundred years, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and J.K. Rowling. And it's like all three Christians, among others. And I think if Tolkien hadn't written Lord of the Rings, we wouldn't have most of the work, the sort of style of writing that we have now. And I think it's basically so foundational that we wouldn't know what to do without it. And I think, I can't speak as much to music, but I think in the literary world, it's like literary fiction sucks. And it was an interesting thing that happened in the 70s, that sort of introspective existentialism came into vogue, and the sort of deconstructionism. And they're stuck there. It sucks. It's not interesting. Storytelling with like a recognizable arc and sort of archetypal themes is seen as like kind of naive in those worlds. But to me, I'm like, you guys aren't, David Foster Wallace tore everything apart and left us with nothing, and then killed himself. It's like, you kicked down our sandcastle, and we're like, what a stupid sandcastle you built, and left us nothing. Anyway, I guess my contention there is maybe secular art isn't the best, and I would be curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I think generally I would agree that like the best art ever has always been Christian art. But I think my eye is almost always towards new art, just kind of, well, partly because I had a good art education. Like, I I love neoclassical architecture, like I love Vivaldi, I love Bach, Beethoven, like I can get, it's specifically with music, I can really get down with that stuff. Yeah, if I had to point to something, that's why it's wrapped in to me with the kind of idea of the monastery, the creative monasteries, because it's not that like there's been no good Christian art in the past 15 years. It's just that the art has tended to, what's the best way to put it? It's almost too timid, I think, oftentimes, to be appreciated in the current zeitgeist. But then there's also, so there's a lack of experimentation that I think, like, of all the folks who should feel free to, within the limits of, piety, shall we say, or something like that. Like, it's something like the worship wars, which Christian will be really familiar with. Like, to me, it was just so decisive that music was art. So the idea, for instance, like a heavy metal, hardcore Christian rock band should be totally like thinkable, doable, encouraged by the church. Like, and so when I see a lot of the discourse, shall we say, where it's like, it's pointing to AI images of like pillars, and yeah, it's just neoclassical. It's always neoclassicism. The Hellenistic period of of the Roman Empire. And yeah, so there seems to be this weird like make art great again, I guess, ethos where instead of the kind of trailblazing like somebody like C.S. Lewis, Tolkien did. Like I'm it. So obviously, there's going to be all-time greats, and I'm sure Tolkien and Lewis will go down in for different reasons, probably, but as all-time greats in music. I think since the advent of the radio, basically, yeah, the secular, I guess, the secular art thing is more in like high art and film and music, but yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to say, because I think generally I would agree with you that like when you look at the history of art, all of the best stuff is Christian. Like, are you going to come up with a better song than Ode to Joy? It's like, good luck. Are you going to come up with a better hymn than Amazing Grace? Like, probably not. So like the Christians should be the ones who know that. Like, sing a new song is a command given in light of the Psalms, right? Like, it's the greatest ones have already been written, so that's kind of implied in sing a new song. And I think maybe a part that is wrapped up in this is somehow just the nature of the creative spirit and what it means. And maybe this gets to Seabax's question a little bit, but like what it means to be a creative. I think for a long time, being a creative has meant being a type of, which I fit the bill. So like less dependable, more emotional, more neurotic, not the guy you want in the foxhole, but maybe writes a story about it afterwards. That's like the perfect kind of. And so I think that like the church in general, in one sense, the high church and the like more institutional church kind of like lost a lot of those manly men a long time ago, in some sense. But then there's a weird thing in which like the evangelical church is like replete with this kind of sensitive, in touch with their emotions man. But the true artist and the true creative, I think there's a sense in which he's always going to be, or she, it is going to be doing a little bit of that prophetic function, where pushing the envelope, pointing to the thing that God is doing, which is unthinkable, or calling the culture to repent. And so, yeah, now I'm just thinking about in general how the state of music in general has. I go back and forth day to day whether we're in a great place that we've never been to before. I can listen to the best music of all time at any point during the day. And then I just remember that like so many, musicians can't like have to wash dishes just to eat. So yeah, all that to say, I generally agree with you that the Christian art has, for the history of the world, been the best art. And I don't see it, us making the same quality or even like desiring to, like, I don't see there being a Christian push for like, we let's fund these artists so they can live comfortable lives and let's get this Renaissance going, kind of a thing. I don't see that happening, which I would love to see.
I can say two things about this conversation that might be salient. It seems like, at least in music, I can speak to my perspective from the music side of things. It seems like the Christian art question really kind of actually also ties into James's idea of belief, in that if you're going to be a Christian artist, musician, then that means your lyrics have to be somewhat propositional. And so there has to be like a message tied to it. At least that was the thinking. This is like, I'm just kind of speculating as to why there's this discrepancy. And then therefore you kind of forget about what it means to be a creative if your assumption that your belief is propositional, and therefore your lyrics will be propositional. And maybe in the storytelling and film industry that might be less so, because you still can do the show not tell thing, whereas in music you're kind of forced to like actually add words. And so the first thing you go to is something propositional, like, well, what am I going to say, as opposed to what story am I going to tell, what picture am I going to paint, abstractly, still with words. But if you have that separation, then you kind of forget what it means to be a creative and what it means to be an artist and what it means to believe. Like all those things kind of have to converge in order to have good artistry, good Christianity, and the combination of the two. And so it's kind of somewhere along the lines, there was a separation or a misunderstanding of those things. And I think it's going to take artists who can synthesize all those things again to be able to be good artists, aka good believers and good storytellers. Like you're going to have to recapture what it means to believe so that your lyrics aren't hyper propositional.
Yeah.
And then you're also going to have to develop the craft so that you're a good artist. Like you just kind of see those two things as the same. And so, yeah, I see the kind of renaissance of Christian art coming in. I feel like it's coming, but it's not here yet. And, it should be here because all the prophets are speaking about it. And, you got the Petersons and the Vervekis and Peugeot, like they're all like, people are shouting about this meaning crisis, and there should be a kind of response, but I don't think that the response needs to be like, I don't know, propositional. Like, it's like, it's not a thing that we should do as like a duty. I don't know. I don't know how to put words to like, the charge to ignite the Renaissance shouldn't be one of like this kind of forward proposition. Yeah.
It makes, I mean, Matt and I, we were both at Symbolic World when Vesper Stamper kind of gave a charge at the end. I don't know if you remember that part, but that's kind of what reminds me. But, I've thought about like related to this corner. I have two thoughts. One is like, I kind of see it more as a garden than as like a propositional structure, and that when I think about the little bits that I understand or try to understand about when like somebody like Peugeot has talked about the logi or the logi going out, like these ideas and this knowledge, get a little Platonic and I don't know, Gnostic, but also Christian, like get all weird. But these are seeded seeds. We're only really like 7 years into this seeds being planted. And I know in all of your work, but I read it in yours, James and Matt, in the way even you have it set up on your website. Like when we talk about the word and the belief, it has gone in and it has gone deep, but it's, I think that the season that we're in is like, maybe it's just now like sprouting a little green. It hasn't grown into a tree again, And I think this is, in my opinion, is part of that. It is the most exciting thing, but it's like, it's kind of like, it still needs like a lot of care. Anybody that kind of wants to pretend like they're coming through as somebody strong, like, you're going to get crushed unless, these kind of forebearers, like those names that you mentioned, this stuff was already, this has been on their mind for like 10 years prior to when we were introduced to these ideas. And so they can stand stronger, and more formidable. And then this other piece of it is something along the line you talked about, working on a craft. And the other thing that James brought in earlier, when he talked about kind of the deconstruction of in the literary space, I mean, and that's really in all of the art spaces with postmodernism, I assume, is, this nihilistic thing that, and we're in a category error that is, that there even is a sacred secular divide, but this is just all reality. Like, I think that's like a big category error. That's kind of the impediment. It's like, when we look at, well, what is secular art doing? It's just like, what is art doing? It's not, what is Christian art doing? It's just, what is art doing? But that category error has been brought into this other piece of the equation, which is the difference between entertainment and art. And in the church, in writing, in music, all of that, with, that is, I think, one of the biggest delineations that we feel more than we, and it's been said, but it's when something has been successful in that arena and even artistic, but these lines between entertainment and art, I think that is another kind of category that we're trying to find ourselves out of.
Yeah. I'd like to try to pull some of these together. So category error stands out to me. This secular art versus art as a conduit for reality is interesting to me. It makes me think about the realm that we all come from, which is like Bush era Christianity, of Christianity being at the height of its power and sort of no longer Christ-like in the sense of, I'm reading Judges right now, and all of the sort of prophetic judges are, Deborah or Gideon or all these like otherwise losers that are taken out of the established order. I mean, that's a theme throughout the Bible. Jacob as the youngest, the heel grabber, is used by God to bring reality back to the structure. And the Christian church is not immune to becoming non-Christian or becoming, I'm kind of mixing up terms here, but becoming sort of a structure of order that is not necessarily reflective of the underlying logos or the underlying reality. It makes me think also about a story we probably all know, of the Dostoevsky story of Christ being imprisoned, and the sort of miracle that because of Christ's infinite love, and even to the prosecutor or to the persecutor, he leaves the door open. And so Christ always finds a way to even in structure, even in structures that do not want him, even the Christian church, because of his love, he leaves the door open and for prophecy, for new creation, for a new access to reality. And so, yeah, we were also talking about how that ties into belief, how that ties into being a prophet. We mentioned prophet, we mentioned belief. I think all of that's relevant. I'm struggling to tie it together really coherently, but I think we're kind of touching on the themes here. The other thing that made me think about was the gossip trap, which is like the reason that humanity didn't progress forever, for hundreds of thousands of years of us being around, is because basically we tear each other down with our structures. If anybody says anything prophetic, we tend to gossip about them and destroy them. What Christianity allows for is for artists to escape the gossip trap, and for us to, I don't know, find something new. And I think we enjoy that, even though we still feel remnants of the gossip trap. We still feel like it's difficult to be truly creative in the church, even though that should be the, to Mekmo's point, that should be the place that should be the monastery, that should be the conservatory where you are able to be the most creative. That is functionally, it's not necessarily like that. And we end up with, church pop and all this stuff that's sort of derivative and ugly. Yeah. So then the last thing, just to kind of, if anybody wants to jump off of any of this, is the entertainment versus art thing. And the entertainment is sort of like talking about, like, it's sort of like hyper porn. It's like, it's the hyper landscape that keeps you from feeling reality. It's what distracts you from truth. And art ought to be the thing that sucks you back down into the logos and makes you experience your own death and rebirth. So those are some ideas.
I think the something that's been helping me with these types of questions is like thinking of art as like all the way back to the original, like the basic idea of art as in like artifice. And so if you're building a chair, are you going, like, should we have Christian chairs and secular chairs, or should there be good chairs? And so I think that that lack of distinction helps, and it starts to bifurcate once you start applying it to, fine arts and things with logos, like things with actual content that you have to think about. But I think there's still something there that's salient, in that there's something I don't know, maybe subconscious about the disposition. I don't know. It's like garbage in, garbage out. So it's like, if you live a good Christian life and are a good Christian, then you should just go perfect a craft. That doesn't mean you're a good artist. It means you're a good Christian. But then you go perfect a craft, and it will be informed by your disposition. And so that's a bigger ask for Christians, because, we have revealed truth, and we have, an organized way of living that we want to follow. And so that does put a heavier weight on a Christian to continue to inform his life so that the things he creates reflect that. But I would think that would apply to all artists in general. Like, you're going to, secular or not, they're going to just be informed by the way they live their life. And so I think that the kind of question around, what do Christians do with art? How do we make good Christian art? It's like, how do we make good Christians? And then the artists become the artists, and then we'll reflect that in their work.
You mentioned the writer, I guess, David Foster Wallace, and that he took his life, and the way that, in my kind of limited understandings of something like our postmodern reality related to art, but also coming up, like my deepest exposure was always evangelical, distinctly Christian art as a category. Like, that's what I was kind of afforded and allowed. And so there's, in this state of, I think it's complicated, because something like Christian monasteries have actually happened at places like Elevation Church out by you guys, and places like Hillsong. They actually did it. Not perfectly, but they were, they created studios, and they basically hired these artists to write and to make and these musicians to try to make the best thing that they thought they could make. And, and I think that sometimes when I think about the categories of what's happened with the sentimentality that's sometimes ascribed to the modern worship movement versus like what it takes to actually do technically what they've done, what those mega churches were doing with media production is now what like Orthodox churches are doing and Catholic churches are doing with like certain media production. And I remember watching a 2007 live stream of a church service that was out by you guys in South Carolina. It was New Spring. Like, they were producing a Sunday morning live stream that was professional at their little monastery, their little resource silo. And that was a long time ago. That was a lot of money and a lot of energy that they did now. And they were trying to make something good every Sunday, but it was wrapped in this whole culture too. So that's complicated. But then the other piece of it is, like Timothy Chalamet. I don't know if y'all saw that float on Twitter last week, whenever he got up and basically said, I know it's not popular to say that you're a tryhard, but I'm a tryhard. And in postmodern, kind of in this other postmodern deconstructive thing, it's not been popular because there's like a nihilism that kind of floats around that says, if you try to like improve upon your craft and you don't just say that whatever paint hits the floor is creativity, then you're shaming my creativity or something in this reality. And so that's also something that I think is in contention, where it's one thing to like, say that your kids, painting is something, but then to glorify a 20-year-old that's still doing finger painting, it's kind of like, what's going on here? So I don't know. That's probably dicey, but those are some of the ideas that
I think you're right on. I think like you're right over the target with that stuff, because it keeps, I think it's connected to what Matt wanted to talk about. And it has to do with what creative people seem to need, let's say. Because to start with, maybe just so I'm not just saying nothing, my definition, I would not go with the everyone's creative, so no one is category. I think that creativity is a gift, that it has to do with the one body, many members. So to that extent, I remember Peterson saying something like this, that like, if you score high in creativity or openness or whatever, you basically, like, for your own well-being, you basically like have to create, or else you get like, constipated essentially. And that's me. Like, if I don't make something or do something creative, basically every day, I turn into a horrible husband, like bad worker, bad employee, bad dad, dog dad. And just like, so for my own health, I have to do that. But to like the question that Matt raises is like the question, because when you're working on a craft, like maybe there are some crafts where you can just kind of like lock yourself into your room for your whole life, and just like, because you know what it should be, you can just keep working at it until, you know, it gets to be what you know it needs to be. And there seems to be some artists who can do that. You know, they're just internally driven so much, and their taste and their talent, and, you know, these are like the phenoms. But, you know, it's Matthew principle all the way down. So I think for every artist, they need some sort of community to kind of like bounce questions off, or bounce, you know, stuff off of, like that, because that's the answer to your question, Matt, is like, one, you either review your stuff prayerfully and kind of between you and God decide, is this worthy of you? Or does it need to, you know, a couple thousand years in glory once I've been perfected to really, for that idea to really come to fruition? So I think you can do it that way, but then that's not necessarily art. You know, that's kind of like, that's to me on the level of like prayer, when you're kind of evaluating in that kind of, you know, it's called for writing like a shitty rough draft or for like a demo. But then I think you become an artist the moment that you show it to someone else, and you like brave that kind of relational distance and that kind of performative vulnerability, you might say, of saying, this came out of me. I think that this is worth sharing. So, you know, it's that feeling when, you know, like in the TV show, like of the talent, like the talent show, and you're just like, you get done with your little jig and you see them breathing, and you wait for the applause, right? And so that waiting for the applause moment, I think is something, in one sense, you can help with the creative community. But if that doesn't raise the hairs on your, like, if you're not nervous about that in any way, then I think that's when it just becomes kind of the rote, mechanistic, maybe like market driven or popularity driven. Like, yeah, you're making pop music at that point. You're not making art, you know, and maybe you're smart enough to convince people that your pop is art because it's like in the Andy Warhol sense or something. You've got something something meta to say that's interesting. But I think that there does have to be that kind of, and, you know, this is like Kierkegaardian. This is like a type of Kierkegaardian individualism, because like for the artist, I don't think of, or the creative, however you want to put it. There's a sense in which, yes, maybe it's enough for you to just make your songs, write your stuff to God, and for that to be kind of not necessarily for the life of the world or for the community you find yourself in. But if it's connected to that one body, many members thing, that means that, like, as the creative, the rest of the body needs your creative work. And so you're basically, you're on the hook whether you want to be or not, if you're that type of person who just like has to do it. And so, yeah, then you get into that kind of rhythm of life where it's like you create, you meditate, you ruminate, stuff comes in, stuff goes out. But it makes it so much easier if you just have a group of people, whether they be creative people or not, to just kind of give you some sort of feedback to see to the extent to which your work has been accepted, you know, or if, you know, if you're Cain or if you're Abel, I guess, you gotta play that out. So yeah, that I think it is, though, connected to what that question that you were talking about, Matt. I really
like that. You become an artist when you share it with someone else really resonates with me. I feel like that's a really, I think even as AI becomes better at sort of simulating art, that is more, we're discovering that is more central to creation than maybe we previously even thought. I mean, wise people have always known, but in a general sense, what we thought, because I think about, you know, maybe not necessarily categorized as art, but if you think about somebody like Magnus Carlsen, who's a master chess player, sort of risks his reputation by playing the game and is great at the craft of the game, but is also a sort of personality within the game. Even though a computer can beat him handily, infinite, like he can't win, we're still interested in the art of playing chess. We're still interested in the personality of Magnus Carlsen because there is something being risked there. And that doesn't mean that a perfect game of chess beats the risk of the performance of chess. And it also doesn't mean that we devolve to relativism, that any chess player is as good as any other chess player. Great chess players are good because they risk, and they still they prevail. They are reborn in it, or whatever, you know. And so I really like this idea of waiting for the applause of you know, whenever I have this Believe essay that I've worked on for a long time, and when I imagine publishing it, and then like I imagine it in like various people's inbox, I'm humiliated. I'm like, this is the most embarrassing thing. I don't want to do this. I think reframing that into the sense that actually that's what makes it valuable. If I don't feel that this is humiliating, then it's worth nothing. It might as well have been written by AI, and it could be. But it doesn't matter if it could be, if I am willing to risk my reputation on it, because we're interested in the art even unconsciously. We're interested in the art to the extent that we know the artist. We're interested in reading novels and listening to music, not because they're technically perfect or proficient, but because we have some sort of relationship with the person who created it, and we understand what they risked, and we understand that even on an unconscious level, we're emulating them. We admire them. We admire their courage. We admire the fact that they overcame even you know, the idea that, you know, Usain Bolt his legs are not the same size or something like that, or most of the greatest lawyers are dyslexic and they can't read that well. That, you know, I don't know, apocryphal to some extent, I'm sure, but there's an overcoming to it that I think is you can't untangle that. And I actually think it's interesting, sort of side topic, is that AI reveals that to us. AI reveals that we don't understand actually what's going on with art, because AI won't be able to do it, in the sense that we want to be satisfied by it. And when we notice that, and in the next 5-10 years, when we really come to terms with the fact it's like, we're not interested in this. Why not? What's actually going on here? We're going to have to reconcile. We're going to have to solve the meaning crisis, because otherwise we're just going to be confused.
Yeah, and this goes back to what McMo was talking about like the dreams versus reality. Like, it's novel to like play with Grok or a image creating, even the video stuff, like the stuff that was coming out about, like, you know, stuff making it look like a 1950s Star Wars or whatever those things were. It's like novel. It's interesting. And for some of that long form stuff, there is probably more creative elements that have to be like inputted, but it's just like, hey, make me a picture of this, you know, I've used for thumbnails and stuff. It's not, it's amazing how uninteresting it is. Like, because I'm going to bring Chris back in here, and he's going to sit around for a little bit and kind of catch the conversation. So, you know, the thing that it was making me, there's a couple of things that it was bringing in, is like the idea of, like, for me, one of the biggest questions that I have had as somebody that was doing the modern worship scene was like, I really like performing probably more than I liked writing or creating. And those were some things that maybe I needed to do to be in that, but I liked being in the live music. I have lights on me right now, you know, I like that stuff. Where does that, you know, the performance side of it related to entertainment, but also then like there's craft and like, you know, connecting with an audience in a live situation and that kind of thing. And so you know, that tension and going back to, you know, bringing in the ideas around AI is the other piece. Is part of what is interesting to us as humans is, you know, this story or this, you know, trial or the overcoming, you know, like the Cinderella, like that is you don't get that when you just like tell a AI prompt to do something. Like, you don't get that story. So I don't know. I think that's a piece of it too. That's all I got. Someone else brings something in. Don't wait. Let Chris kind of don't feel like it's bad talking. Let Chris kind of get a flavor for where we've been going. So.
Well, I'm just thinking about AI, and because it's so good at summarizing, it almost could be confused for what you were talking about earlier, James, with the like that kind of hyperspace or that place where our hyper body / souls are in peril from these hyper predators being these like principalities and these these black holes of dopamine that we kind of just swim around in now. Oh shoot, did I lose the thought?
Black holes of dopamine.
It got eaten by a hyper predator.
It got eaten by an attention well. But yeah, so with AI, like I think that's the thing, that it's not actually doing what we think it's doing, that the phenomenon of the experience is not the reality of the mechanism. You could say that, like, yeah, is AI just the like laser light show of the modern technology, in the sense that you can have the coolest lasers and the best fog, but if the music sucks, then it's not going to be a great experience. And I wonder to what extent that, like, yeah, that we're failing the what's it called, the
Turing
test. Yeah, the Turing, like we're failing the Turing test, not the and some of that.
Yeah, I like that.
There's something about that kind of like vulnerability to the principalities thing that I think is just a little bit more. It's usually closer at hand, to kind of use the Heideggerian frame, I guess. It's just usually closer to hand, that kind of feeling of vibes or spirit, and that kind of, because it's about it's about sensitivity. It's like, because I'm just thinking of the ways in which, yeah, like a type of art education can save you from being fooled by an AI, because you just know that that's just like not possible, kind of a thing. Like if you're familiar with the Greek statues, when a fake Greek statue comes, you're not going to be fooled by it. But then there's something too just about, oh gosh, I may have to give up the ghost, because I feel like I've totally failed to stick the landing here. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring back in that kind of idea of that hyper landscape as it pertains to AI. Yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I might jump off of that, and maybe we can keep it going. I think you mentioned that people don't often know why they're doing things. Somebody mentioned that at some point. And I think what brought to my immediately what came to my imagination was this. I recently saw Richard Dawkins he published this chat that he had with ChatGPT about he was like, you seem to pass the Turing test, and he was asking about its consciousness or whatever. But the upshot of the conversation was that it was boring. It was not interesting. I read just a little bit of it, and I was like, this is not interesting. It made me right now. It's kind of making me piece together why I think that was, and it's that what Dawkins was doing was he was sort of playing against that Bush era Christianity. He was a trickster in the house that had been created in 2005 or 2000 or whatever. He was a jester in that house, but he didn't know he was a jester in that house. And so his rise to prominence, his livelihood and his career, his persona was sort of built off of being a trickster in this overly confident American Christianity that had come to power around that time. But what he thought he was doing was being rational. What he thought was interesting was the sort of the logic of what he was saying, or something like that. But that's fallen apart, because now that there's some sort of like rational discussion happening with ChatGPT, it's like, who cares? This is not interesting, because we've lost the plot. We forgot why he never knew why he was doing it. And so now that the game has changed sort of under his feet, he's confused. It's like, maybe I'm a cultural Christian or something like that. It's confused him, I'm sure. And so I think that these I don't know how to stick the landing either, but I think
well, I'll jump in, is he didn't maybe understand his own presuppositions very well. He just took for granted that he was right from the beginning and just went in a lot of ways. I'm going to do something a little bit to kind of help bring Chris in, is I'm just going to go through these little summaries of what our pitches were for the conversation, and see if something else kind of gets kicked out through this. But I kind of shared just this basic, like, what is a creative? What does that even mean? And then McMo said he kind of talked about a couple of things like corporate life versus the artistic pursuit, dreams versus reality, ideal day job versus like doing exactly what I would want to be doing with creativity, and what happened, or could there be artistic monasteries again? Christian art versus secular art. Matt Hylam said, what do you do is whenever you're like working on a project, and how do you choose between setting that project aside or pushing through? Am I bored or distracted? Or is there really something here, beneath the marble that I just haven't like kind of found yet? Or am I just like doing prolificity with bad ideas? And then James said, he talked about this essay that he's working on, which is belief. And these hyper landscapes, like hyper predators and hyper porn in this new world, we're like playing in this other landscape, maybe within the digital space from our embodied realities and things that are happening here. It's hard to know what our beliefs are, or what we really believe, or what it means to believe. And so those were kind of some of our themes we've been dancing around, Chris. I don't know if that brings anything up for you, or if somebody else wants to kind of like bring another piece into the conversation.
Well, it seems like y'all were kind of in the middle of talking about the hyperreal space, or maybe towards the end of the conversation. That's very interesting to me, that like, I think because we don't know what we believe, and we have this new technological landscape of the hyperreal, is there an aspect of creativity that can like break through the hyperreal? Is that a little bit of a question? It's like we're all like on my Twitter, I have like a little cartoon in my header, and it's like me at the pearly gates, and it's like, oh, I just, St. Paul or whoever's guarding the gates is like reading your Twitter feed, and it's like, no, I was just practicing prolificity. That wasn't the real me. That's kind of how I feel, as far as like maybe it's much more of like the ironic art space that is so it's everywhere in the culture. But I do have those questions of when we're practicing these kinds of things, and practicing even creativity in public. I mean, I think that's most of, if you're doing it somewhat professionally, you're practicing with an audience, and so, and I think about art as a very communal, participatory reality, rather than like the virtuosic individual. Maybe that's just from like always playing in bands, or when our music that I write, it's usually like I have particular co-writers that I work with a lot. That's, you guys know that that's such a common thing to do. And so the participation of art, but I don't know, in the professional spaces, we're always you're kind of chasing after that line between what your pure artistic self feels when you're being you're at your utmost of creativity and expression and capabilities, but also, okay, how can I do other things to make money on? You're always like mostly between that, and at times maybe one more than the other. But I don't know. I'm very curious about you came up with a hyper predator, and is this kind of another name for like our powers and principalities at work in the hyperreal space, as we've created a new frontier? Mm-hmm. I guess if we create it, and a hyper predator is would be something like a power or principality. It's always at work, so it's going to go. I guess it can go wherever we can take it, right? Is it not something that has an agency of its own, or I don't know? That's just a fascinating word you threw out there. But and maybe I kind of blended together a lot of the prompts.
No, yeah,
You just
That's
really,
it was a great summary actually. Of the
okay, cool,
conversation.
yeah. All right, we're caught up then. Okay, good.
I mean, there was a point that someone's McMo was talking about, like laser, the laser, just the right laser lights and smoke machine, and you had some pretty good laser lights and smoke machine going on at your show.
Oh yeah, we definitely have all of that. We're
Um,
almost like right on the edge of campy. I mean, you saw the show, Christian. He's kind of
That-
just digging
I would-
into this profilicity of like WrestleMania, and he's just having fun. It's like embracing the campiness of it, and he's a very high energy artist to play for, and
I kind of
love it.
I wanted to actually bring that into the conversation because, I was talking, your wife is, she does creative design, and I was talking to her after the show, and she was saying a lot of these companies, wouldn't have taken Russell's idea of WrestleMania as his tour name seriously. If you like really, this is like, but it's actually very authentic to him. And it got me thinking about like this space that we're in, where we're kind of the new sincerity that's coming through. And even when we talked about Timothy Chalamet saying, I want to be good, but there's also this, like, I'm tired of being ashamed of something I really think is interesting. And I'm ready to integrate that back into who I, and even share it.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, you mentioned the campiness of it. I mean, y'all are in Nashville, which is also like the center of CCM. And it was like, also like, I could hear that coming through, like the music even that y'all were doing. And there was a lot of things being mashed up in it was really interesting to me related to all that. But there's like this sincerity, but also, we were talking earlier about the difference between like entertainment and art. And you were saying it's like, how do you get that balance between, like, or are you even supposed to, or is it just that, some people are just trying to like lean more into the entertainment, and that's okay.
Well, yeah, there's something in that, Christian, that has to do with like the meaning crisis and that hyperspace, right? That like entertainment is a danger in the hyper real space that James was talking about. That like there's a sense in which that like the meaning crisis, I heard philosopher O.G. Rose say that the meaning crisis is a personal development crisis. That like when we talk about the meaning crisis, we're talking about a whole lot of people around the world that kind of feel stuck, or that's kind of idea of stuckness. And I think that one of the things that art can do is it actually it forces you to kind of sit down and like shut up and to like take this in, like that's the feeling of encountering good art, is that it's like this pause and time stops, and you're not being entertained, you're being kind of drawn in or drawn up into contemplation towards the good, the true, and the beautiful, if it's great art. But I'm also like, I'm reminded of this. I saw this YouTube video podcast of this guy who I'd seen on just like Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. He's like this Australian guy who just basically he recommends like weird and cool music, kind of chill music, stuff you never heard before. And he was having an interview with Max Richter, who's one of my favorite composers, living composers, if not my absolute favorite living composer. But I was just noticing that even in the podcast, they would put on a record, and instead of just kind of sitting and listening, they were talking over it. All the while they were kind of at the end, they like they had a couple of recommendations where it's like, yeah, just sit down, listen to this album, and don't scroll. And I'm like, it's been embarrassingly long since I like sat in a dark room just listening to music and didn't scroll. Like sometimes I can get a whole album in if I like go for a walk, or if I'm like really depressed, and I just got to sit with myself, and then I'm going to put on a Love Supreme or Vivaldi's Four Seasons and just go to my happy place. And but yeah, like, so there's this, it's about attention, and the danger in that hyper real space is, I think, the danger of misplaced attention. Like it's it's a prey danger, right? Like if because that was the image I was getting from you, James, was that like that that it's a dangerous place for the soul. And I think that it's dangerous because of that like attention and that tendency to get pulled in by entertainment, and just kind of a slowly but surely losing that inability to kind of sit with something that's challenging, that might actually like change who you are. So there's like a similar courage that I think needs to be talked about, because like we could talk about the courage that's required to like create something and like stand before the audience and wait for the applause. Like that's true, but that's kind of inside baseball for creatives. I think that there's an equal need for courage in taking in difficult art for the layman, for the non-creative. Like sit with Beethoven's Ninth, like listen to a whole jazz album, and maybe don't start there. Maybe pick your favorite artist that is a good album and just go back and listen to that album again, like from front to back. Because and this is the same way with a good book, right? Like when it's a really good book, you read it again, and maybe it's hard at first, but then you get into the rhythm of it, and you just get taken over, and you're like, oh yes, this is why. And then you start seeing new things. And I think that that's kind of the gift, the point, the purpose, the process of art, in a lot of ways, maybe beyond just the kind of obvious pleasure that would be, like this idea that we have that art kind of starts, coming back from the hunting trip, we're like whistling and happy, and like beyond all that stuff. I think that what the meaning crisis has brought in is this real, it's the same thing as like going from short form to 2-hour long conversations, right? Like it's that same pattern of like sitting, breathing, listening, wrestling, right? Like that's I think where it needs, where maybe we as creatives need to do more to challenge folks to kind of like wrestle and to not give them a spoonful of sugar with the medicine or whatever. But that itself, like that might be as big of a cultural change as, Trump winning or something, like it might take as big of a vibe shift to get people to slow down and then take, art,
I
wrestle
think
with. Yeah, go.
that was really good. There's a lot of things that popped up in my head from that. I think that shift is going to be like, it's the solution to the meaning crisis, or like it's the problem of the meaning crisis, and not necessarily like categorized just as, people need to be less entertained and learn how to sit with art more. Like when you said trying to sit with difficult art, the first thing that popped up in my mind was I have to sit with difficult life, being a husband and father. And so learning how to do that kind of informs my way of living. And then, then I can kind of, I don't know, transmute that into the way I entertain myself, or the way I, approach leisure in my life. Reading a book that's not just going to be like a, injection of dopamine, because I've been like inculcating that sitting and ruminating and waiting and patience and difficult tasks, and then seeing the beauty in that over a long period of time. And then that's how I want to spend my rest time. So it's kind of like, the question is like the chicken and the egg kind of a thing, where it's like, does the art inspire us to also take time with our life, or is our embodied reality as husband and father and working in the workforce to, make paychecks, does that inform our disposition to then go off into leisure or higher forms of participation in art that are more difficult? So I don't know what the answer is in terms of like which one should you approach first. I would say both, which kind of ties into your idea of the kind of artistic monastery idea. I've been reading the Benedict Option by Rod Dreher, and it's hard for me to describe, but I feel like my goal as of late in the last couple of years has been to like make my house a monastery, in order to inculcate my faith into my family, but then also as a seed bed for my art. And it's going to inform me how to do those things, like to look at something and sit with it for a long period of time, and just to plant seeds in my kids, and not try to propositionally tell them all the things they need to know. Like, all of that is informing how I'm approaching creating. And so, yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know how to land this plane, but yeah.
I got something for you. I really like I like where this is going, and we're talking about this vibe shift that's going on. And actually, this is McBo. When you brought that up, that was kind of where my mind was going too. The sort of it kind of edging into the political vibe shift that's going on as well, and that, I think we sort of live in a world where the hyper landscape that we're endowed with is this materialist hyper landscape that we're sort of, even us in this space where we're sort of fighting against that and sort of saying that is actually not bedrock reality, we still act as if it is in a lot of the ways that we behave and the ways that we speak in the world. I mean, not to pick on you, Matt, but just like to say, to call your sort of like desires dopamine is like to sort of extract yourself from it, to sort of give it a sciencey sounding name in order for us to sort of get a higher level, what feels like a higher level view on who we are. But dopamine is a strange concept. It's something that we say a lot. I say it all the time, but what does that mean? It's a key to the house. Like whenever you're engaging with something pleasurable that maybe is not in the best long-term interest, that you can actually see a rise in a specific chemical or specific hormone in your brain. And that's supposed to therefore explain what sort of principalities are at work within us. How does that tell us what it means? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a science word. It doesn't actually mean anything like you put dopamine in its correct context. I'm not saying it's not real, but it's not the cornerstone. It doesn't actually mean anything. And when you're talking about like building a house that is a monastery, which also I aspire to as well. We're thinking about buying a house in Louisiana and just making it a monastery, making it beautiful. And it's something that I'm really interested in. But and also just like McBo, you're talking about slowing down and listening and like listening to a jazz album. But it's also like, I think you have to go a little bit darker than that. I don't know if that's the word, but it's like, yeah, do that stuff. But also like we've all heard the terms like the hedonism treadmill, or we've all got these terms that cut us to the end of the story so that we don't actually have to live the story. Like, oh, I can't eat candy all day because that's a hedonism treadmill and I'll adapt to it. And blah. It's like, fuck all that. Live the life that you and pardon me, I know we're a Christian room.
I'm just glad you did it before me.
Live the life that you are called to. Do not be lukewarm. There's certain moderate Christians are so obsessed with like being sort of pleasing and lukewarm and not living sort of a vital life of sin and goodness and beauty and mistakes and ugliness and just tearing it up and having agency and having belief and seeing for yourself what these things feel like. That doesn't mean that you go down every horrible, egregore tragedy that you come across. You have some wisdom about it, but at times I think that there's times to do things that are not generally agreed upon. The culture of the very dominant culture of left-wing politics is like we have the set of facts that are derived from our set of experts, and if you deviate from that, you are a bad boy. You're naughty. And it's very religious in its connotation. I know we all know this very well, but I think it's clear from our perspective that there is, in order to live an embodied life, you're going to have to break some facts. You're going to have to do things that are incorrect, and you're going to have to actually say, I don't know what dopamine is. I don't know what a hedonism treadmill is. None of that is relevant to me. This is what I'm called to do by the Spirit. I don't know if that's going to lead me to premature death or like whatever, exploding with creativity and changing the world, being a prophet. I don't know. Point is that I just feel it's time for us to just let go of this fear. And that's what it really is. It's not actually like, I don't want to do something that's counterfactual. The thing is there's a ruling class that scares us into not being embodied. And that is what is actually holding us back, is there's there's hyper predators out there that promise to destroy you. They will cancel you. They will destroy your spirit. And you have to have courage. You have to be with Christ in your courage and die to that so you can become who you truly are. And I mean, there's just no other way. And so here we are. I don't think Trump is necessarily the answer for like, I think if you're pissed off with the prevailing left-wing politics, you're not going to be, Trump is not going to save you.
I don't know, man. I think Trump might get us out of this whole meaning crisis.
Well, I don't know either way. I'm not saying either way. I'm just saying that, like, it's all about your relationship with Christ and going forward.
Well, and it's the fear. Like, I think you nailed it with the fear point, because at the end of the day, that's what keeps, that's what made Christian art bad to the extent that it was bad for that period of time. Like, fear is the thing that Matt is wrestling with when he's trying to figure out if the demo is good or not, right? It's the fear of, like, oh man, well, for somebody as talented and has got a good reputation as Matt, it's like, oh man, am I going to ruin my reputation if I release this kind of a thing? That stuff does get a little bit easier. I think, like, well, for two ways. One is, like, yeah, it goes back to identity, which I think we were talking about even before we started rolling. But that kind of idea of having a secure identity, and obviously, as Christians, we would place that security of identity in Christ, right? That we've been bought with a price, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's always the fear. It's always going to be, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and so all of the other fear is always like the start of folly, right? Like, and so that's so often what keeps Christians from loving their neighbor. It's what we use to justify not loving our neighbor oftentimes. And so, yeah, if we could encourage communities of courageousness, then yeah, it's not like you need to go listen to an hour-long jazz album. It's more like, see how difficult that seems as a concept, to just, like, do nothing but listen to an album. And it's like, what you should do is probably sit in silence for an hour, and then what would bubble up is all the things that, God is calling you to, that you're kind of too afraid to step out on the ledge to be obedient towards. But now you got me preaching, so I'm gonna
that reminds me of that raw dog phenomenon, that people were, like, hopping flights and not doing nothing,
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's it's trying to, like, prove some form of generally masculinity or something. But Chris, you've been bouncing around. I want to make sure we pull you in. Was anything catching you while you were, I don't know, had to go back and, like, check levels or something? Whatever you were doing.
Yeah, this is just listening to you guys is making me very contemplative. Making home into a monastery, but also, like, the fact that it's like my main gig is playing guitar, touring with just, like, a Nashville pop country act, and it's very much like the bite-sized love songs you're going to hear on the radio, and usually it's the kind of stuff that as creatives we kind of like, we don't like, we like the true higher forms of art, and thinking about this idea of, like, entertaining versus I guess another sort of aspect of performative art. It's like the guy I play for, like, he wants to be up there to entertain. So when he's practicing and, like, working on art, it's more of, like, his creativity is coming through in the writing room, in the studio. Like, we're always hearing a number of demos before we finally get the master to learn. It's like seeing the way that these develop. Like, he is a very artistically talented artist, but he's just writing love songs you hear on the radio. I mean, they're authentically him, and when he's performing, he's like, no, I'm here to entertain people. And he tries to find his moments, which might be, more of your acoustic, fingerpicky ballad song where he wants to connect to the audience in kind of those more serious ways, I guess we can think of. But at the same time, like, there is something very authentic about his love of performing. I'm not really much of a performer. I do enjoy and love playing live music, and, like, the band is a bunch of dudes I've known for years and enjoy playing with, and we do the best we can with, like, making these seemingly easy, kind of formulaic country songs, like fun to play and challenging and as musical as we can. So there's a little bit of bounds there. But say when it's in the studio writing music with my wife, it's just tapping into something so much more on such a different plane. It feels like connecting just kind of like deeper into your heart. So I don't know. It's like it is a tough balance of, I've played this song 150 times. We're trying to come up with a new arrangement for this year for a song we've been playing for 7 years. It's like there's some monotony to kind of the bounds of creativity that you can get stuck in, like in these professional contexts where it's like, my paycheck is to play Russell Dickerson songs, right? That's what I get paid to do on this gig. So you kind of have to, I kind of started treating it more of like I've started treating church, I think in 2020, with enough of coming on the other side of deconstruction and listening to Peterson and Peugeot and getting into Paul Vanderplay world, like was hoping for something like different and real, that church could be more like that. But then 2020, church shuts down, and like I was kind of glad to stop going because I was having my own issues with church, right? It's like, good, I love to go and like do worship or play on the worship team or during worship being at church, but as soon as people start talking, I'm like, I can't handle, like I'm gonna have to sit through an hour and a half of like kind of nothingness, right? Like this is kind of junky. But when we stopped meeting and that went on for long enough, I was like, actually, no, I need this. And I can set aside, like, my problems with church that I had were actually my own issues of how I was like framing my experience. And so it was more of like, no, I need to just go and just be there and like sit my ass down and just like don't have the chattering writer the whole time, right? I kind of feel like I started approaching like this kind of work in the same way of just participate, be present, shut down the critique, and just like, I guess, do what you're supposed to do, right? So I was like, I'm hearing my dad as a kid who's like flicking me with his arm on the back of the pew because I'm just being a little bit too restless or something. And I do feel like I might be like in a season where like creative output, as far as what I really like to do musically, is pretty barren. Like there's not a lot of it happening right now just because of what life is like, and kind of how the busyness of work ebbs and flows. And then we just had a kid 5 months ago, so but I don't know, I guess trying to figure out where I wanted to go with that, kind of just verbally processing these feelings you guys are pulling out of me. I don't really like feelings, but
This is creative group therapy now.
yeah, isn't it?
It was always that.
Yeah, but okay. This might feel like a left turn, but so maybe that is like a little bit of a meaning crisis for me as far as my creativity and I guess artistry on whatever level. But this idea of entering, I feel like a lot of the critiques that people tend to have about contemporary art, whether it's music or visual art or any of that kind of stuff, it does boil down to critiques of like neoliberalism, but nobody knows how to put a word on it. When you throw a neoliberal out there, people are like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, neoliberal, that's just the world you're in. So it's like, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Everything is neoliberal. It's like music on the radio is the formalized programmed, packaged, almost like bureaucratized system. And being on a gig where a dude, like we do radio tours, he gets songs on the radio, just watching that system is so bad for your soul. And having to interact with those people, you're like, I can't believe this is what determines like who's good, right? Who's worthy to be played. Like this it's like it's Moloch and Mammon at the same time. You know, it's like, oh gosh. So how do you have to play along with Mammon? It feels like, and you know that's not very fun. But it's like if McMo, you said something like maybe Trump is the one to kick us out of this meaning crisis. There's a weird aspect where like there is a potential for the neoliberal world order to like it's maybe being thrown by the wayside with this guy. And it's a guy who, in his own aesthetic, in his own life story, is almost the most quintessential like neoliberal character, Trump. Like he is this packaged media personality that people have known for 40 and 50 years. And his success comes from the height of the neoliberal order, like doing New York real estate and media. Like that is the Mammon system of neoliberalism. How does it take this guy to maybe kick us out of it? That's poetic to me. It's like that actually makes sense. You know, I think my more left liberal friends would like kind of hear that thing you said, Big Bo, and scoff, but I'm going to be like, actually, no. I think because they see a contradiction, and I'm like, no, I don't see a contradiction. I see that. Yeah, exactly. It's like working itself out, and I think just the type of, I guess, spirit he does bring to the culture is bringing meaning forth from all sides, and that's where maybe we're in the world where everybody's watching 2 different movies or 3 different movies, and the meaning is proliferated. Like the meaning might be he is Orange Hitler, or the meaning might be he's Red Caesar, and he's, you know, the coming Caesarism of the 21st century that, what was it, Spangler said was coming. Do you guys know Gio Panichetti on Twitter? Do you know this guy? He's more right wing, but he's a visual artist and he paints a lot. But he has amazing analysis, like art analysis that he does that really vibe with kind of this space of the conversation. I thought maybe some of you guys might know him, but this idea of like neoliberal kitsch is kind of something I think he coined. But there's something about Trump with the gaudy, all gold, like bringing, he's brought like just the power of whatever his personhood is, and it's almost like it doesn't even belong fully to him. Like it's so mediated for us. It's like there's multiple Trumps, and there's such a gravity around his personality that, I don't know, it just set us on a new course. And maybe like, how does art respond to the vibe shift? You know, I think I see some people just like, you know, hyper embracing that in like a positive propaganda way, in the way that like propaganda can be true, and just embracing that form of art, which I find really weird. Maybe that's almost a throwback to like a century ago, which could be scary, like the throwback to, I don't know, like Stalin had an aesthetic, right?
Well, that's
He
even
he absolutely had a vibe, didn't he?
Peterson collected it because of that. I think
exactly. It's
a
wild.
little bit of what you're talking about, the intensity of the reaction to, or the projection of, has its own intensity, you know, I think. And there's, I mean, Yeah, there's a lot there. I do think he's a mirror of a projection, of what we have. There's some kind of decorum that we wanted to try to like hold on to, but at the same time, our culture was pushing up The Simpsons and stuff. It's like, what do you expect? This is what do you expect that we have hit their prophesied president? And to pretend like we were above that. And I've seen some, just to keep on this track for a second, but I've seen some interesting nostalgia for Romney should have been president. I wish Romney was president on Twitter. Like, there's all these pictures of him and Rand, is it Rand Paul? Like in the plane, and it was really interesting visually to be like, that was politics. That image, that is politics. Like a Romney with the sleeve rolled up, like with the gray hair, like people
We went from Hamilton to Kid Rock. Like that was the transition. That's the vibe shift, is Hamilton to Kid Rock.
Yeah, and so there's also, that's another level of it, which is the populist side. But I think that it is an interesting time, and a lot of things are being mashed together right now. And what is on the other side of this, I think, is a big question. So we're kind of running on the last bits of this conversation here. So maybe if we could try to do a go around summary, kind of take a second as I'm moving this here, some ideas or closing thoughts on kind of where we've gone and what we've talked about related to different stuff. I know James has been writing, and so hopefully there's some things. I guess I would just go back to that. I used to have a very integrated life when it came to a lot of things, except for one part, and it was enough to destroy the whole thing. I felt called to do Christian ministry, and then I started playing music, and then I helped do a church plant in high school, and then I go to college, and I'm biblical studies and music minor, and I'm traveling and I'm developing a band, and then I do this, and I have a band, and I'm at home, and I lead worship, and then I'm in a small group with my church, and I'm on staff, and it's our whole life in this small town, and everything just seemed to be integrated. And I, even at the end of that season of my life, I was watching a lot of a Christian apologetics, and I was like, I want to write an album about truth, and to the extent of what is, factually true or something. And that's where Matt started the whole conversation with building Christian music off of propositions and not just being true. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't even write because I wasn't being truthful in my core to my relationships, to all of these things. And so I really think that is a big part of how can you point to the truth if you're not being truthful, and that points to its own truth, which is something that we would have seen in Thomas Kincaid's art, that points to that actually does point to truth, but it points to the kind of anti-truth, and it's so interesting because there's actually a documentary coming out about him coming up. I saw it advertised on Instagram the other day, but I had this really interesting experience. That was the first time art ever spoke to me, was through Thomas Kincaid. And it was because I could see myself, my life in his, I could see the isolation. I could see the lack of intimacy. I could see the hiddenness in his perspective from his art. And so that's a big part of this journey that I've been wrestling with coming into this. And so I'm thankful for you guys. So let's go around the table here and kind of give some closing thoughts. McMo, we'll start with you, man.
I guess closing thoughts. If we could have talked for hours and hours, I would have liked to drop another bomb, which is the metagelical or the meta modern idea, and kind of play around with
next time.
Yeah, what those ideas could offer. But in general, I think that post vibe shift, or in the middle of this vibe shift, I am very hopeful, and I want to keep encouraging the like right wing bros to learn about art and learn about beauty, and to go beyond just kind of pillars, and to stretch yourself, because the left, to the extent that it's won over our lifetimes, has won through culture, and that is the ground that was seeded by the church most heavily, I believe. And so I want to, call your congressman, donate to my Ko-Fi. I think that it would be a great thing if the conservative movement became a movement of beauty and the arts. And I think we're right there. I think we're like, it's just a step behind the thinking right now.
Oh, wow.
So I might not ever vote Republican, but if you guys brought the arts back, yeah, that'd be a pretty tempting ticket.
Matt, what's up?
I think to close, I just kind of want to throw out some ideas that were pointing out to me from y'all talking. This vibe shift and the hyper real. I feel like at some point somebody mentioned that AI is like exposing our sense of that we don't know what art is, and having to reconcile with that. I think AI is also like revealing that the hyper real exists, and so we're trying to figure out what to do with that. And I think that ties into what you were saying, James, about the language we use around experience, like a dopaminergic cycle. What is that? And then having to recover the kind of like more holistic way to speak about something like that. Like the devil is tempting me, like that encaptures more reality than a reduction of dopamine. So having to now have the courage to be able to say that in a way that's non-propositional, right? And to really believe that this is like tying all the things in together. It's like being a good Christian means understanding that reality and not succumbing to the whims of the mob that wants us to think scientifically, and we can speak about the spiritual realm, but that's at the same time breaking through because of things of AI, like AI. So we're in a zeitgeist moment where we should take up arms and have the courage to speak that way, and in our art, non-propositionally. Like how that works, I'm not sure. And then what I was saying before about like, being a good Christian first and then pursuing your craft, that is also incorporated into like, well, you should tease out what it means to be a good Christian, right? To really understand, right, like an incarnational reality that God is present in everything. And so therefore, like making a good chair is you being a good Christian artist, because of your understanding of hylomorphism and how reality is filled with the glory of God. And so all those things are kind of playing together. And then somehow as artists, we're kind of called to be bold in what we truly believe in. And if we're Christian artists, then now it's going to look like something like speaking to these things in ways that counter this kind of reductionism that's been flooding our society up to this point.
Thanks, man. James?
Awesome. I'm having a similar experience. I don't necessarily think that I know that I can't just speak like a fundamentalist, that there's some kind of bridge that I think is happening with this vibe shift. And when it's time to, Matt, your summary spoke to me, because I believe that saying that the devil tempted me is more correct. And I think kind of tying that into what I'm going through in my life, I want to believe, and I want to know what that will bring to my life. Like I said, I've come from Louisiana. I come from a chaotic background. 2 of my brothers are dead, and that should be me. And for some reason I'm spared that, and I'm trying to reconcile. I'm trying to be alive in the world, and I'm trying to do God's will. And that doesn't mean to me to me personally in my life, that doesn't mean giving up thinking. It means bringing heaven and earth together in my own life in whatever way that I can, and hopefully seeing that ripple out, and however that might happen. And I'm on fire about that. So I want to believe, and I want my life to be a life of belief, and I want that to be in service of the kingdom. And so to the extent that we can manage that, I think this conversation is a good reminder of the seriousness of that call. And Godspeed, everybody. Good luck.
I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. And Chris.
Yeah, that's cool. I was talking about that verse last night with Rod Hare and this guy Ken in another group chat. I believe help my unbelief is always a good one. I think for the tortured hearts of the corner. Man, everything you guys said was sending me down different thought paths. Like Christian, with you're talking about Thomas Kincaid. I remember my parents had a Thomas Kincaid painting of like the U.S. Capitol in the rain in the foyer, and
we can all see it right now.
Yeah, when I was a kid, from like second grade to sixth grade, I would go to this woman's house in like a adjacent neighborhood, and she was like a grandmotherly figure, but she painted like acrylic on canvas, and so she'd do this art class for kids. And you do it was like every Monday after school for a few hours, and you'd like end up, with different paintings. But I remember like thinking Thomas Kincaid was so great because he had those very hyper realistic images, but then part of his thing was like he'd mass produce paintings, but then he'd like do some touch of brush on each one printed or something, and then it started turning into like Disneyfied like scenes of like almost like this medieval thatched roof, like bucolic pond side. Like it just got so strange, and is such a mirror of the culture in that way. And that's where like that guy Gio I mentioned, he uses Thomas Kincaid as his example of like what neoliberal kitsch is in art. And then McMo, you're talking about with the vibe shift after that, encouraging the right to rediscover art. I think we always think about art as left wing ever since the counterculture. And I think if you do enough history of art, you can find like left wing and right wing movements of art that we look back on now as very popular. Like there was a bit of like high modernism in the early 20th century that was very much right wing art coming out of like England, people like Ezra Pound. And there's an artist I like named Wyndham Lewis, who's very much like a right wing kind of artist. And I guess even the fascists like had their aesthetic and their art. It's hard to deny. It's like, yeah, you look at high Stalinism versus like high, like that 30s Nazi art aesthetic. Like there really is a paradigm there that you can sense, but they're sharing so much of the imagery and I guess speaking their power into the moment, like the magic of art, what it can do upon the culture. And this can get to what Matt and James were talking about of like, okay, how do we use it properly for the kingdom? Because art is always responding to the moment. If we're writing this beast of history, it's like whichever way it's turning, like how do you speak into it in truthful ways, without, it's like if there is a moment of right wing art, I guess like playing country music is a little bit right wing, right? There's like I go to some very red places around the country, when we play a lot of shows in the cities, you know, and if we play a club somewhere, but it's like you go play the Iowa State Fair or even like the Washington State Fair. I remember seeing the most patriotic moment I've ever experienced was right outside of Seattle, you know, at the Washington State Fair. It was wild. It's like I've never seen more Trump signs in my life. I've never seen more American flags in my life. It's just like, this is, man, we live in a crazy place. But I do think there's another guy I like to follow on YouTube. His name is Brent Hull. You guys seen this guy? He's an architect and a designer, and he's I would say he's kind of doing right-wing art. Like, I found a really great video history he did of like American architectural styles, and he starts like from the colonial period and moves on up into like through the McMansion age. And part of his business is like he's a very skilled contractor, tradesman. Like the work that he demonstrates, it's like, oh yeah, you have big, high-paying clients and do amazing work, but he's doing traditional architecture. I would say is typically more right-wing, and he has plenty to say about, you know, modernist architectural styles and postmodern styles. But he's more of just like creating beautiful things. Like he has his baseline, but he's not doing it ideologically, I guess. I would say that's an example of a guy who's like kind of doing good, I guess, right-wing art without being propaganda. I find plenty of art in architecture and what it does to the human spirit and the experience. So, I don't know. Yeah, you guys are definitely inspiring me to try to re-engage, you know, some deeper expression that maybe has been a bit dormant for a couple of years. But I think that's what the corner does. And maybe as you come out of Lurkerdrome, you know, you come out of Lurkerdrome in other spaces too. So here we go. Lurkers unite. I guess you guys aren't lurkers. You guys have been around, but.
Well, I mean, James didn't know he was a lurker, kind of like me. I brought him in. Someone pointed me his direction. Chris, yeah, I know you've been on one of my live streams, but I don't know how much other times you've actually popped in. But then, like, Paul highlighted one of your comments like last week.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, yeah, it does.
You know,
that's part
what
of.
sucks is like my work days are very strange. So like with the Friday live stream, it's happened 12 to 2. Well, there's usually a Friday show, and 12 to 2 is like sound check time. You know what I mean? So that's what just happened to me today when we weren't supposed to sound check, because we played the same spot yesterday. Everything's still set up and good to go, but I guess a few guys wanted to work on some stuff. But
as the
I'm sorry I had to jump out and then force you guys to try to reincorporate me, but I appreciate you guys' patience and grace there. So
yeah, it's I'm glad you came in and kind of like toying with this coming out of Lurkerdom stuff. You made a comment on one of my videos a long time ago that said maybe Christian's like making me come out of Lurkerdom. I don't know if you remember that. I'm pretty sure.
I think I do, because I think when you first came out, you're like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And I think Paul was trying to coax everybody to come out too. And then Christian just came out and did it. I was like, yeah, I like this guy. Maybe I should.
Well, here we are.
Know.
Over a year later, hanging out. So, guys, thank y'all so much for, making time for this in your life and schedule and taking it. And I've been truly honored and encouraged. And that's the other word, is that what we tossed around a few times, was encouraged. Like, this is encouraging. So like, and hopefully others will be encouraged as well. So I'm going to end it here, and you stick around, guys. Don't just jump out before we close it. We close it down backstage. So, all right. Thanks, guys.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderclay, Rod Dreer, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.